Watched it so many times before, and now you're gonna watch it again. But it's been so many years since you last saw it, and now you show it to your friends, and they're like, what?
What am I watching?
Why this film?
And I'm joined today by Melissa Pennel from the Follow Your Fire podcast. Hello!
Hello, Emily. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. Tell us a bit about who are you? You're a life coach. What?
Yeah,
That's insane.
What is that? That means I stand on the sidelines of your life and I just go, rah, rah, rah.
Do it.
Go. Keep breathing. Exactly. I love to kind of dance around the sort of stereotypes around life coaching. But yeah, so I am a coach. I really just help people to kind of meet their best self and be who they would like to be, but for whatever reason, feel blocked in becoming, which can be an entire conversation in and of itself. But it's really cool and really fulfilling because I feel like my work is to help people who should be talking and sharing and creating and starting businesses and falling in love and all of these things that we convince ourselves like, oh, like, I guess that's for other people. Like, no, that's for you too. So that's what I do. And I started a podcast actually around this idea, the question of what should I do with my life? Because, and that's like a huge question, right? That's not something that you're like, maybe it can be very heavy and overwhelming. And I say that because I was someone who was stuck for years with this weight of what should I choose? Like what job should I choose? Should I get married and have kids? Should I travel the world, making bracelets and selling pies with dreadlocks? Like I had what could be a real privilege, right? Like I had choices. What a gift. And what an overwhelming, crippling, paralyzing, oh my gosh, I don't know what to choose. So I'm just going to sit here and not do anything and become a drug addict, which is totally what I decided to do. So I'm trying to save people that path. And it's really just a series of interviews of me talking to people who are doing either really interesting things or just really interesting people doing very like what could be considered ordinary things with their lives. But the whole point is kind of recognizing that we can find meaning and purpose, whatever it is that we do, if we allow ourselves to choose and just like start down a path. So I just kind of ask them like, how'd you figure out what to do? What obstacles did you face? What advice would you give someone on the same path? And it's really cool because as I'm really sure, cool. Right, just like sitting and talking to people in these, we have excuses to kind of deep dive with people about really interesting topics.
It's really, I've listened to a couple and it's interesting and it's empowering and it's like inspiring. Like you listen to these people's journeys and their choices and the way they dealt with things. And what's wonderful is that they've always come from a place of like, they've built themselves up and they've made these choices. They haven't just had the perfect streamline journey. And that's so inspirational. It's so good. It's so good.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for having me on your podcast. Because I also think it's super fun. And really the ways that we figure out how to enjoy this thing called life can be so varied and different. And one of them is totally movies, like and art and reading. And so I love that we get to deep dive right now.
Yay. I'm very excited because your chosen movie, 1995's Now and Then. The IMDb breakdown is 4 12-year-old girls grow up together during an eventful small-town summer in 1970. What is your relationship with this movie?
Ooh, I love that question, Emily. It is a very intimate relationship. Like when you read about, if you decide to read about this movie, which I did, you see that the usual girls and women that love it really love it. And it was just so paramount when I think it came out in 95, right?
Yeah.
But I was 11 and I was just on the cusp of womanhood. And I think that this movie was sort of like this guidebook for me of what possibilities might lie out there. And in some ways it was really ahead of its time because I know we'll get into kind of the plot, but you see these 4 girls that become women and do very different things with their lives. And speaking of, what should I do with my life? It was sort of this almost caricature of these 4 options. And it was, I guess you could call it like a friend to mine when I was young and just wanted reassurance.
Yeah. So I've never seen this movie. I'd never heard of this movie at all. Wasn't on my radar. You I think you first pitched it to me as like Stand By Me for girls. Instantly I was like, yep, that one, I'll do that. Yep, that one please, thank you. And then I looked at the cast. You've got obviously the 4 young girls and then the 4 older women. The cast is freaking incredible. You go from Christina Ricci to Demi Moore to Thora Birch to Rosie O'Donnell. Like, it's insane. And I mean, just from like the synopsis and what you told me about it, I was like, yeah, this movie's gonna be so up my street. It's like practically in my bedroom. And it was like it was like a big old comfortable but like authoritative hug. Do you know what I mean? It was like, I wish, I'm gutted I didn't have this when I was 11. I'm gutted that I've had to come to it as I'm pushing 30, because I was like, this would have solved so many problems that I had as a teenager.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm such a huge believer in like we find things exactly when we should. And also, to your point, I didn't realize this, but as I learned more about the movie, it's been really hard to find and almost kind of, it's almost shameful how it is really easy. I know that we touched on this a little bit privately, but that Stand By Me is a phenomenal movie. A lot of us love it. And part of why we're able to love it is that it replays on TV.
So
it's accessible. Right? Yeah. And if this was not...
This was impossible to find. Like, it took me like 2 days of searching to like find it. And then if you want to buy it on DVD, it's like £21 in the UK to buy it on DVD. No. I was like, what? And it must be because they like have like 2 copies in the warehouse, so they're like pushing the price up. And you're right, it's so unfair when you can get Stand By Me, you can rent it off YouTube, you can buy it on Amazon Prime, you can get it off Amazon, you can like, it's everywhere. It's even being reshown in cinemas a lot of the time. It's so accessible, and yes, it's wonderful, but so is this, and this is same vibe. I love those like coming of age, like all of a sudden nothing really happens, but like so much happens. Just like meandering journeys through small towns with these just character studies of these people. And God, it was sad. It was a mystery. It was funny. It was like, yeah, I've got so much to say about this movie, and I'm so annoyed that, like, as you say, it's invisible. Like, I'd never even heard of it. And then I couldn't find it. And I was just like, why do you not want me to watch this movie? Like, it's so annoying.
Yeah. I know. Yeah. And it's funny because I almost messaged you and said, hey, maybe I should choose a different movie, because it came to Netflix, at least here in the United States, for about 6 months. And that's all last year. And I thought it was still there, and it wasn't. And then, you know, that's present day, but it's so interesting how accessibility works, because we're also talking about, you know, it's 25 years old now. Mm-hmm. And in that time, you know, not having it, there's so much interesting about the way that this movie was received, promoted. And I guess I do feel lucky that I was somehow like 11 years old and just like bug-eyed and saw like, oh, I have to watch this. I still remember when I didn't get to see it in theaters because I was a kid, and you know, when we're kids, we're very much at the mercy of our parents. My mom was great, but she didn't make this like a day at the movies. So I remember we went to Blockbuster. Did you guys have Blockbuster ever in the UK? Mm-hmm. It was like the best Friday night when we went to Blockbuster, and I got to rent this. And I remember just like, I'm not always a huge fan of movies. Like, I love this one, but I wasn't a kid that was just like, oh, this is how I like to spend my time. I love to read. But specifically this movie, I remember feeling this anticipation, and it was like, I knew this was going to be important to me, which I think also kind of shows that we get what we expect. I think I was ready to really relate. I was at the right age. I knew that this was like my favorite actresses. And also speaking of the cast, like Christina Ricci was, just to use one of them as an example, she was like the it girl of the 90s for a lot of us. Yeah. I know that you're a little bit younger than me, but she was in Casper. She was in this movie. There's a bunch of other things that she did that
Addams Family.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Huge. Addams Family, Mermaid. She was little in that.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think part of it was just like, oh, that's my girl. I'm going to love this no matter what. But yeah. Well, I'm glad that you found it. I'm glad that you
fabulous.
were able to.
Yeah. I was so happy because I love Thora Birch. She's an insanely good actress. And then Christina Ricci, I always forget because she's so wonderful in Mermaids. And as you say, she's like 6, 7 in Mermaids. Yeah. And then you sort of just attribute her to Wednesday Addams, which is very sort of monotone, but still very good performance. You could just like, the monotone can override you sometimes. And then I was watching her in this and I was just like, she's so good. And she's like 11. And you compare her to like all the other child stars that you watched when they were 11, like the entire cast of the Harry Potter movies, and how awful they are. No offense, guys, but like you were terrible. And she's acting her little socks off and she's so natural in front of the camera. And it's a real testament to this movie to see so many of those incredible standout child actors just being brilliant. And obviously the majority of the movie focuses on, it's sort of structured within this frame of you open with them as adults and you close with them as adults, and then the main format of the movie is them that summer that they shared, that last summer in 1970. And it's funny because I would have watched a Now and Then Part 2 where they do like an It, where they then have the story with the adults extended. I wanted more of these characters. Like it was a perfectly paced and well-timed movie, but I just, you get sort of 10 minutes at the beginning and 10 minutes at the end with the adults, and I just wanted more.
Oh, I see. So you I thought you meant for a second that you'd actually want to see like an updated Now and Then, but you mean like you want more of their lives and how they lived in the present day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, completely. I think I think whenever too, when I really love a movie, I could always be like, more.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I agree.
So I don't know, this was something I noticed because so Christina Ricci plays Roberta, and she's played in the future by Rosie O'Donnell. And everything about this character and who she was played by in the future, I was like, she's going to be the gay representative. She's going to be the LGBTQ plus character, and she's not. And because they edited it out, she was meant to be, and then they edited it out. And like, I don't think it's a massive problem because when you're watching it, you're still very much like, I know this character is a lesbian. Yeah. Like she is a lesbian, regardless of whether you're going to tell me or not. But I think that's one thing that I was like, oh, that's a shame that they felt they had to do that they had to take out the explicit reveal of that. I thought that was a shame. That's the only thing I can say about this movie, really, that has a sort of negative to it. I didn't know how you felt about it, if you knew or was aware.
I wasn't until I did a little deep dive for our interview. And I could have told you as a kid, and I had, one of my primary caretakers was a gay woman. Like I was very familiar with and open to this alternative. And back then in the 90s, still somewhat, I'm not going to speak to like say that today everyone feels far more comfortable and that there's no diversity, no discrimination, because there totally is.
Yeah.
I think that they definitely, what's interesting too that I read is not just that they left it out as like explicitly saying like, oh, Roberta is a lesbian. They probably weren't going to say anything, but test audiences didn't seem to like that she was gay, or it was alluded to that she was probably gay.
Mm-hmm.
And so they put in that line where there's a part where someone's talking about her and says, Roberta lives in sin with her boyfriend. And so that was specifically added to make sure we didn't think what all of us already knew, like you said, I think. What we know of so it is a little bit disappointing. And also, I guess I'm trying to say, I think a product of its time, because as inclusive as I guess my world was, in Northern California and what I was seeing as a kid, still the greater, United States climate still has a long way to go, but especially in 1995.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that interesting that test audiences can have such a profound effect on a movie?
Yeah. And I mean, obviously it's such a weird thing to have an issue with, but I get it, as you say, like it was a different world back then, and well, not so different, but like, yeah, they had more power to. I don't think if test audiences came back with that opinion today, they would have followed through with it, because they would have just been like, no, we're not going to be seen as being homophobic in any way as a company. But yeah, to be able to exclude an entire plot line and sub part of a character because they were like, I don't like it, it's too homosexual. It's like, okay, go fuck yourself.
I can totally picture that, like Karen in the audience. Like, I have a question or a comment. And we're like, okay, Karen, you're gonna have to go back to 1950, okay?
Yeah,
because this is how it is. And really that is, like, when I was reading about some of the criticism, like, it is such a close movie to my heart, and also could have been more diverse, but kind of on that same plane. You know how we were talking about how it was inaccessible and how we couldn't really find the movie here in 2020, but back then when it was released, you probably saw it was widely panned. Like, apparently, I had no idea as a wide-eyed 11-year-old, but apparently the critics were not a fan. It got, like, I guess Rotten Tomatoes, you probably know this, was like retrospective or retroactive reviews where they'll kind of take a cumulative look at what reviewers said back when the movie was released. Like I said, you might know more about this than I do. And then I'm guessing, do they also take like a present day look at it and give it a rating?
That's a good point. I'm not sure if it's able to say. I know that it's usually split between critics and audiences, but I don't know on the time scale of that. That's a good point. I would like to think that they keep it updated.
So I guess, well, with Now and Then, it got like a terrible rating from Rotten Tomatoes, 28% or something like that. But even just back in the day that it was released, it was widely panned. But I found this really fascinating study, and it was in 2017. I don't remember what it was called, but I'm happy to send it to you if you wanted to reference it. And it was just about and this was 2017. So this is like, I'm bad at math. What is that? 17 plus 5 is 22 years later after Now and Then's released. And in 2017, 78% of critics are white males. And then it breaks it down even further. And it's not just, so it's not just male, but it's white male. So there's too few female reviewers, well, this is a tongue twister, too few women of color reviewers. And even, let's say that there's like a specific amount of these people doing reviews, the white males are doing more than the women of color. So I'm bringing that up to say, I did read, like, there's a little bit of like a diversity issue in the movie, which completely appreciate. You know, I am a white person. I was able to look at these girls and think, oh, I can relate to them. I can imagine being in their shoes. And also, I think part of why it was panned is that it was reviewed by a bunch of, like, I want to say old white guys. I don't know how old they were, but it's like,
yeah, but it's going to be, isn't it? It's going to be those old white guys who, like, for all intents and purposes, this movie isn't for you. Like, and it should be, in the same way that The New Little Women is for everyone, and you should all go and watch it and gain something from it. But fundamentally, I can understand more if you are an old white man. You probably don't want to go watch Little Women because it's not for you. But that doesn't mean you can just shit on it because you didn't enjoy it. You have to look at it from an artistic point of view. And this movie about 11-year-olds coming of age at the end of a summer, at the beginning of a new decade, it's not fucking for you. It's for the 11-year-olds that are going through their first bra and their first kiss, and like how they spent their summer together as friends, and like drinking Coke floats in the cafe while they save for a treehouse. Like, fuck off. Go watch Stand By Me and like leave it alone.
Yeah, right. I like this. I'm gonna write this on a poster board and carry it at my next rally. But
it's frustrating.
I think it's so frustrating. And too, if we're going to go here, because we're going here, I think it's so interesting that, like, we as women, as little girls, especially back in the 90s and still today, are expected to relate to stories about men. I mean, really, like, back then, there were not many coming of age stories about women. And we are expected to relate to, you know, Stand By Me, which once again I love, The Goonies, The Sandlot, all of these classic adventure stories about boys that I was like I was totally a Roberta, like tomboy. I want to kick ass. I want to take names. And here's a story for me. And yeah, of course, it doesn't necessarily appeal to the predominant group that's doing the reviews, but B, actually a friend of mine pointed out when we were kids, once again, back in the 90s, if we would be watching TV, and I remember that she noticed this, if we would be watching TV and let's say there was a commercial for like a board game, and then you usually would see at the end of the commercial, some kid would be like, I win, like hungry, hungry hippos, I win, or whatever it is that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
It was always the boy that said, I win, because if a girl had not, maybe I'm saying this backward, it was girls could see a boy win and think, oh, I want to play that.
Yeah.
But if a little boy saw a girl win, society told him, oh, that game's for girls.
Yeah.
I can't play that. Right?
You see it in everywhere. They claim that the introduction of She-Ra led to the downfall of He-Man. Like, despite everything else that was going on in that time, they want to blame that. They want to blame the introduction of the female Ninja Turtle to the downfall of the Ninja Turtles before it was risen again without the female. They constantly want to blame women for the downfall of everything. You're absolutely right. We have a person here in England, you may not have heard of her. She's called Scarlett Curtis, and she's the daughter of Richard Curtis, who's the director of Four Weddings and a Funeral, Notting Hill.
I know those
She's
movies.
brilliant. She's an activist, feminist, author. She's wonderful. And she recently wrote this poem on Instagram. It just reminded me of it. It's called My Brothers Have Not Read Little Women. We sailed to Treasure Island, became Lord of the Flies. We saw ourselves in Holden Sea, damaged, sad and wise. We gave our time to Oliver, our hearts to Spider-Man, followed Charlie to the factory, took flight with Peter Pan. Your words are universal, your characters are true, your stories transcend gender, but women write books too. How freaking good is that?
That just gave me chills.
Right? But it sums up everything that we've just been talking about and the problem with our society where the standard and the foundation is male, and everything else suffers if it's a deviant from that standard, or it has to try harder, or it has to fight harder, and it has to justify itself more, and it's exhausting. It's so exhausting to have to compete consistently with this norm and this status quo that I don't even fucking know why it's there, because like you come from our vaginas, so like you know what I mean?
Wait,
surely...
Emily, can this be the title of our podcast? You come from our vaginas, the story of Now and Then.
You know, it's like Lena Headey in 300, where she's like, women aren't important, and she's like, Spartan men come from Spartan, we bear the Spartan men, we're so important in this society because we provide it with its soldiers and whatever.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
No one ever thinks of that, and it's like, fundamentally, without us, you wouldn't exist because you don't have that skill.
Preach, sister.
So annoying.
And that's, I think we're also kind of talking about, I love the term, it's the water that we swim in, because you picture a fish swimming in water and the fish doesn't know it's in water. It's just, this is where I live. This is how I breathe. You know, it's just, I'm a fish. And so when, you know, here in 2020, which I love that we get to say our year like that now, and we've gone through all of these different kind of incarnations of feminism or women's rights, or, you know, a more diverse, inclusive, and I'm putting up air quotes, quote unquote, culture, especially here in America. And there is so fucking far to go, because we started in such murky, like white, privileged, able-bodied, cisgen. I'm trying to think of all the things that like our society specifically is built on. Mm-hmm. That, and I know we're kind of going on a tangent, but it's so interesting because this really colors, you know, our adolescence as people. But from, you know, I'm a girl, identify as female, and it really colors everything that we think we can do, every way that we think we can relate. And so I think it's really cool that we're talking about this, because ultimately we view things from the water we've swum in our entire lives. And it's, especially here in America, a very patriarchal, white male dominated. And so when I had a good friend not too long ago say something like, it's tough to be a white guy right now, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, I know this man, I love him, I know like his heart. And also I was just infuriated because it's like, okay, you know what? You got to, I love that poem you just read. You got to Explore with Peter Pan, followed Charlie to the Factory. You got to, and these are like kind of fun, lighthearted examples, but it's like all of our examples as when we see women doing cool things, like in this movie, if we haven't talked about it, these women have these four very different vocations. One of them is like a wife and mother. One of them is an OBGYN. Roberta is a doctor. Another is an actress. Melanie Griffith, or Teeny's character, becomes this like big Oscar-winning Hollywood actress. And then Demi Moore is a writer, kind of like an emotional, intellectual, like tortured writer. But we get to see these four different outcomes. And this is like that's four different possibilities, but that's huge when you're living in a society like, and once again, like I know I'm privileged, but we got a long way to go. So I love that we're kind of on the soapbox, Emily. I'm so happy
100%.
to kind of get to like
stay here forever. Because also they did it without men. Men very much take a backseat in this movie. Like there's very few important male characters that shape and define them particularly, I would say. Like I'm annoyed with myself. I've just had to check in with myself and be like, yo, why did you announce Scarlett Curtis as the daughter of a man? Like, do you know what I mean? That was my go-to. I was like, in order for people to know who she is, I will have to refer to her father and where she's come from. It's like, no, let her stand on her own 2 feet for her own reasons. I'm so annoyed with myself, so I apologize to Scarlett Curtis. You're not just the daughter of Richard Curtis, you're Scarlett Curtis. And that's the kind of traps that we get into because it's so embedded in us. And in this movie, yes, you have the sort of boys of the town that they hang out with. You have the father that leaves, and you have her husband later on, who is a kid from the town. But really, they may sort of kickstart things, but the women take those things forward alone. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like her dad leaves and it affects her entire summer, but we're seeing her deal with it. And he never comes back, and he's never there like taking her through it and guiding her through it, and she doesn't have a sad conversation with him at the end about he's going to tell her that it's going to be okay. She just deals with it for whatever reason. Yeah.
No, totally. I think that, and once again, because it was such a usual plot line to have. It's funny, I was watching The Little Mermaid, and I love that movie. I love the soundtrack. My baby loves it. And I also imagine when she gets old enough to watch it with me that, like, I know we're talking about a different movie, but like in The Little Mermaid, she literally gives up everything to be with this guy. Like there's a line from Ursula that's like, but you'll have your man, when she realizes all that she's missing. And so much is sorted around that for women, especially back then. So yeah. Do you know that Bechdel test? Do you know what the Bechdel test is?
Yeah. Big fan.
Yeah. I honestly can't recite exactly what it is, but I know it involves two women speaking to each other, not about a man, for a certain percentage of the movie.
And I think they have to be named characters, two named female characters that talk to each other for a certain amount of time about something other than a man. It should be the simplest test in the world to pass. And yet, huge movies. And what's interesting is often movies that have a female protagonist will fail it, because what people forget when they're looking at things like The Hunger Games, you're like, oh, but like a woman is the main character. So like, what do you want from me? Like, you've already won. The woman is the main character. Name like another fucking woman in that movie. Like, there are them, but name them to me. Like, you can't. And how often do they talk to each other? And how often do they talk to each other about things that are not her love interest or her mentor or her father? Or do you know what I mean? Like, the conversations are constantly dominated by the men in her life, even when talking to the very few other women in the movie. And actually, Hunger Games is very good for female representation. It's got some brilliant female characters in it. Still doesn't pass the Bechdel test.
Yeah, no, that's so fascinating. And it's a great example of how what we think is representation might not be. And also going back to like inclusivity, it's really hard for, like, if I was to try, this is not like a broad stroke, but if I were to try to write a story about, say, a Black disabled man, and I'm just going to go with like this particular group of minority, like that isn't where I come from. So I think it's a really important story. And I know this isn't to say authors have to have lived what they write about, because it's not true at all. But when it comes down to it, if a lot of the people controlling Hollywood, whether it's the script writers or the producers, or even the fact that this narrative about Roberta being a lesbian, it's like, who decided? Who was the deciding factor? Because audiences cannot like something, but we can still, we as like the movie production team can leave it in. But I hope I'm sticking to my original point, which is basically, this is why representation in every arena matters, because it's like, if there isn't someone in the room, in the actual driver's seat, writing the script, advocating for the storyline, realizing that, you know, women don't just talk about men, or they shouldn't. Like, of course it's going to fail the Bechdel test, right?
I completely agree. This is a massive problem that I have, that I talk about every day of my life, where I'm just like, I am not going to, as you say, go out and write a story about a black, gay, trans person, because that's not my narrative, and I have no right really to tell that story because I know nothing about it. And I can if I want to, but I believe that I perhaps shouldn't, because like, let that person tell their own story. And that's the thing. It's like what Salma Hayek says in Dogma. She's like, why does the Bible come across so misogynistic? Because the pen writers were men. The people holding the pens were men. So they made, who wants the head of the John the Baptist? A woman. Who's the cause of original sin? A fucking woman. The writers were men. And so you're right. And I don't know how to fix it, but other than to just be like, go and write your story. If you can't see it on screen, go and write it. And that seems like a pressure to put on people. Like, you know, I'd be sitting there like, well, why can't you just give me my stories so I can take them as easily as my peers can for their stories? But at the end of the day, like, go and tell your narrative and fight for it and write your story and get it made and get it produced and get it out there and get the different stories out there, because when they do come out there, they're so fucking good, because they're fresh, they're refreshing and exciting and good. Like Jesus Christ, like everything that Jordan Peele is doing, and like all of these different stories that are coming out, that I never saw anything like that in the cinema when I was a teenager. Nothing. And it's perfect gems of movies and stories and narratives. And it's like, we need to give a much bigger space in, let's say, Hollywood. Like, they should almost start forcibly chopping it up into sections and being like, right, only 20% of movies that come out next year are allowed to have a male protagonist. And then it forces, when you restrict things, it forces things to be better, because it forces you to have to keep going back and thinking and choosing what's right, because you only get 20%. So you better make sure that that 20% is fucking good if you want to make your money, because you're going to be competing with other stories that haven't been seen yet or heard, and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, it's very frustrating.
No, it's such a fascinating. Do you remember a couple of years ago at the Oscars, I think it was Frances McDormand, and all she said when she accepted was like, inclusivity writer. And now everyone was like, what does that mean? And it's like, oh, that means that I'm going to demand every set that I'm a part of is inclusive and diverse. And I wish I could say I followed up and seen what exactly that has meant change-wise in Hollywood and in general. But it makes sense that, and you know, as we have these conversations, I can hear the men, and not all the men in my life, thank God, but some of them that I'll be over a dinner table with. This is not my hubby. I just feel like I have to say this because we will go head to head, because once again, this is the water that we swim in. So he doesn't always realize, and I don't always realize when I'm being, you know, unaware. The reason diversity is so important, right? Whether it's racial diversity, sexual diversity, gender, sex, all of it, is that because we've lived in this patriarchal, privileged society for so long, that these groups have had advantages of education, of background, of praise, of encouragement. And by that, I mean, that's why it's not as simple as to say like, oh, you know, like, I agree. We want to just be like, oh, just write the stories. And it would be easy for the person who's like maybe paying for those stories to be written to be like, oh, well, you know, she's not as equipped because look, she only has community college, or I'm using a really weird example. But I guess I'm trying to say that it's like, we need time to catch up. We, as anyone who's ever not been represented as they should or supported as they should in like and I think I'm definitely overstepping, like, once again, like, as a white person in America, like, I have a lot of privilege. And also I'm aware that because of that, like, I have had opportunities and advantages, and I'm a fucking woman. And that means that because of that, I haven't had some opportunities, and it hasn't been as evident because I don't know. So I hope I'm making sense, but
No,
this
you are,
inclusivity
completely.
idea, it almost like needs to be, there's this really great graphic where we're talking about equality versus equity. And I'm going to fuck it up when I'm trying to describe it, but it's basically saying, like, you're supposed to give special consideration to people who have been disadvantaged. It's not supposed to be equal. They need advantage for a while in order to catch up.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. I think that's what I was trying to explain as well. We're completely on the same page, that you're right. You need to give them the opportunity and the space for their stories to be told and to get to a standard. Like, you could see it in the Oscars this year. It's like, well, we don't want to give Greta Gerwig an Oscar nom for Little Women because we don't think she deserves it. And it's like, I get it. I get that you don't want to just, like, nominate a woman so you tick that box, but hey, fucking, you did it for all the other fucking categories, didn't you? So, like, why not just do it for this one? You know, like, at least put her up there, even if it is just for lip service. Like, obviously that's not an ideal world, but I'd have been a lot less pissed off if you just fucking nominated Greta Gerwig. Like, what is the problem? It was a good movie. I genuinely believe it deserved an Oscar nom, like Lady Bird did. So why?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Why? What? Where's the maths? Show me the maths. Like,
by the way,
so sick. I also think if you've already won like 3 Oscars or been nominated like 3 times, you should fuck off out of that category, which would wipe out all of those directors. Like, go and have your own special ceremony where we all know you're good and we all know you're going to get the funding for your little passion projects that you want to make. Have the buzz. And then my mum sat there like, oh yeah, I think I want to watch The Irishman. Do you, Mum? You ever watched a Scorsese movie before? No. You ever been interested in watching a Scorsese movie before? No. Well, then why do you want to watch The Irishman? Well, I've heard it's good. Yeah. I think it's going to be, though, for you. Do you actually want to watch this movie, or have you just been convinced to because of the hype? Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
I have so many thoughts on all of the movies that came out for award season.
Yeah. I've never been less informed because I had a baby last year, so I only saw one Oscar movie, but I still completely stand on this soapbox with you. And speaking of Lady Bird, it was, Greta Gerwig is from my town. She went to high school like a couple miles away. A lot of us were and it was filmed here. It was like a love letter to Sacramento. So a lot of us were very enamored and invested. And I bring her up because actually when I was reading about Now and Then, this article was talking about how Lady Bird and that film 8th Grade, I don't know if you saw that, but it was another just like, I love that one. But some of these coming of age films that now are being received far differently and still not the way that they should. Like, she should have been fucking nominated for Lady Bird way back then. All of us were like, what the hell? But basically saying that Now and Then was a precursor or like an ancestor to movies like this being more accepted, more just positively received. Yeah. So it kind of displays like both, almost the importance and impact even of a movie that a lot of people are going to be like, wait, what? Like, my hubby had never heard of Now and Then. He's a guy. He grew up at the exact same years as I did. But speaking of your mom who was like, oh, I think I should watch The Irishman. We listen to the critics. We listen to, the TV, the late night TV show hosts. I'm trying to think of back then who all of the influencers were. Yeah. But it's like, we're all kind of being told what art to consume. So, yeah.
It's so annoying. My sister made an excellent point because she watched Lady Bird the other night. And I was like, so why do you think that one was nominated and not Little Women? And she was like, because Lady Bird came out in the year where women were allowed to do stuff again. And now they're not. Because it was that year where it was like just post Me Too, and they were like, it's the year of the woman. Oh, women are doing stuff. Everything's the new Fleabag. Nominate the people. And now they're like, hush, you had your year. What do you want from us?
Can you get back in your place, please?
Go back to the kitchen.
Go get pregnant.
Yeah.
That is such a great way to put it. And I remember when Lady Bird, like I said, I was in Sacramento, so I was like, is it as big of a deal as it feels like, because we're all freaking out since it's our town? And it was like this perfect moment in femaleness, I guess you could say, that a story, as earlier you were saying, hey, you love those stories that are kind of about nothing, but they're very profound.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so Lady Bird. And it was just like this perfect storm of Me Too and anyway, so I completely agree, sadly, with your sister that it's like,
that it was allowed to happen then, and now it's like shh, stop. No,
yeah, stop. We're not going to nominate you just because
you're a woman, because that would actually be worse, wouldn't it, everyone? Wouldn't that just be worse if we just nominated her because she's a woman? Wouldn't you hate it? Oh, whoa, we're better than that. We have like standard, like, fuck off, Academy.
Yeah.
Like, actually, fuck off. Like, thank God that Harriet Tubman movie came out. So I bet they were all there like, whoa, that's bound to be a good performance. We can just nominate her and I'll take that box. They can't come for us now.
Oh my gosh.
And it's like, fuck off. Like, and Parasite as well. They were probably like, oh, yes, a quick get Korean cinema in here in a big way, like it ain't never been in before. But don't nominate another fucking actors. Don't do that. Just get him in, because he's done a lot of Western movies anyway, so it's fine. He's on Film 4 a lot. Yeah, get him in under the radar. They can't hashtag us now. That's what it felt like. Do you know what I mean? And that's obviously Parasite is one of the greatest movies ever made. Obviously it deserved everything that came to it. Obviously it did. 1917 didn't. Oh, controversial. But yeah.
I'm so, like I said, out of the loop, so I have not seen any of these.
I might have to do my own like Oscars breakdown episode where it's just me being like, here's what I thought of these movies.
I was actually gonna say, Emily, I feel like you need to do an episode where you're just playing the roles of like, here's the rich white guy in the corner, here's the bitchy girl at the movie the movie like trial that's saying, I don't think I like the lesbian blonde, and like just playing all of these characters, because I feel like this is totally your jam. You can take perspective, and sometimes it is helpful to imagine like ultimately just like how these things actually happen, who the people kind of behind the if we're gonna get into like conspiracy theories a little bit, let's just keep going. The Wizard of Oz style. So you're good at it. It's true.
It's so true. It does feel like they just, I mean, the thing to take from this fundamentally when we talk about this sort of thing is that like, hey, well, you know, you can keep watching these movies that mean a lot to you, and you can keep promoting them through the use of social media and finding your people. I'm sure if you went onto a Reddit thread and was like, who remembers Now and Then, you could probably even get it back into a cinema. If you all pushed that hard with like social media and stuff, we do have the power in a way that we didn't before. But it's just frustrating that there does seem like there's a whole bunch of people in Hollywood that are like, we have to make sure we don't make any female movies this year. And then someone's like, hey, I have a woman movie. And they're like, give it a Tuesday release in like fucking February when no one's going to the fucking cinema. And you're like, oh my God. And then it's like, hey, I've got Avatar 24. And they're like, stick it on all summer in every cinema.
Christmas Day.
Yeah, literally. And you're like, fuck you. Like, again, it should be a rule where like, I'm very lucky where I come from. We've got the cinema that's like big and only shows Avatar. Like, you couldn't see Doubt to save your life. And it was just Avatar everywhere. But we have a little independent cinema that literally shows the Banksy documentary, and it'll be showing Parasite, and it's showing all of these like independent, foreign, like fun, good, decent movies that you can go and like have your cup of tea and watch in this like old corn exchange place. And like, I'm really lucky in that I'm able to access these movies through that. But a lot of people won't be able to. A lot of people won't even, like, I wonder how many people will go and see Parasite. Do you know what I mean? Even when it like won Best Picture at the Oscars, all of the newsreaders the following day were like, well, I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I saw Little Women, but I actually didn't go and see Parasite at all. No, it's got subtitles. Yeah, it's got subtitles, so I didn't go and see it. And it's like, brilliant, your opinion is really valid right now. because you didn't go and see the movie because you had to read. Oh no. Like
yeah. Oh, ew, reading. I can't.
Ew, this is a movie. What do you want?
Yeah, no, totally. Also too, I guess there's this maybe idea that there is a lot of art in our past, and I'm fascinated with this. I know I'm on a movie podcast, so from a movie perspective, but because I love to read from a writing perspective, from any kind of creativity or art or idea, there are so many things that we as a society either completely missed or were written by anonymous, and those were totally probably women, or were maybe panned, right? Like Now and Then, or, you know, insert other movie here that was panned critically, but could really be valuable to the audiences that could still consume it. So I'm trying to think of how to like frame this in a proactive, like, if anything, what I'm thinking is that we cannot trust to only consume art that people tell us to consume, which is such an obvious idea, but you know, go see that movie that doesn't have good reviews or didn't have good reviews. Or that's why, Emily, in a lot of ways, I think what you're doing is so cool, because you are kind of rejuvenating. I'm seeing someone like come back from the dead, Hocus Pocus style. This movie that has been lying dormant for years, but could potentially really affect, you know, a 10 or 11-year-old right now, or a 30-year-old. Like, it doesn't matter. These really are an opportunity for us to kind of see life from someone else's perspective and maybe imagine it for us. And and we shouldn't be cut off from that because of the predominantly old, rich, white deciders of what is justifiable to consume and what isn't.
Yes.
Raise the roof.
I'm just making lots of hand gestures, which isn't ever helpful on the podcast. But
I love it. I'm going to narrate. She's been gesticulating. I love it.
But you're so right. I'm so happy to literally like pluck these movies out from the 90s, the 80s, the 50s, and just bring them back. So as a opening to Now and Then, go and fucking watch it. Like, it's very hard to find, but dig around. Hopefully it'll come back to Netflix at some point, and watch it because it's just gorgeous. Let's dive into it. I have lots of notes that's mainly just love hearts.
Heart. Love it.
Love it. Thora Birch is a superstar, I've got down here.
Yeah, she's awesome. Funny, I was just talking about Hocus Pocus, and she was in quite a few of my favorite 90s films. She's a great little actress.
She really was. She still is. She's on The Walking Dead right now.
Is she? Once again, totally out of the loop. So that is awesome.
Thora Birch herself is out of the loop all the time. I think she's had such an interesting career. Most people will probably know her from American Beauty. And I loved her in Ghost World. I adore Ghost World, and she's in that with Scarlett Johansson. And then she did Dungeons and Dragons, which was terrible but wonderful. And then she sort of went off the radar a bit. But then she's come back in The Walking Dead, and I'm just like, oh my God, I love you. And she's absolutely fucking crushing it. And I'm just like, yes, Thora.
Yes, queen.
Yes.
That is awesome.
So it's set in this sort of, I guess you would say, like, sleepy, predominantly white sort of town in America. Your classic coming of age tale setting. And it's the 70s, but it feels a lot like the 60s because it's literally 1970. So both in style and aesthetic, it feels quite 60s, which is really cute. And we follow, what are their names?
We follow Teensy, who's also named Tina, Roberta, Samantha, and Chrissy. Throughout their summer of 1970, which was this kind of idyllic, but also very transformative. You sort of, in the movie, see them go from, to be completely cliche, from girls to women.
You do, though. Like
right?
Physically and emotionally, you see that happen.
Like even, I mean, we're talking about physically, there's a scene where Roberta, who is the tomboy and really into sports and has 4 brothers and raised by her dad, the first scene we really get to know her, and she's taping her boobs down because she doesn't want to be, I don't know, sexualized. She doesn't flesh all this out, but you see this, and that, once again, that was me. I could so relate to this. Like, I don't want boobs. I don't want these things flopping around when I'm trying to run and tackle and do all the things that this little like non-gender conforming girl loved to do. So to see that was really cool. And by the end of the movie, you know, now that I'm thinking about it though, as we're talking about this, and by the way, I know that just because someone in adulthood is a lesbian doesn't mean that they don't go through the same like trial. Oh, I'm going to be into this boy, or just like all of us, I think, have very fluid sexuality. That's like a completely different story. But by the end of the movie, she is sort of into this guy, stops taping her boobs. And I think that is like probably the one storyline that is somewhat male focused, which is okay. It's not like that we shouldn't acknowledge that that's part of adolescence, is like discovering our sexuality and that we're attracted to people we thought we hated. I think a lot of us can relate to that around that age. So that was a really important storyline too. Definitely.
They all have their sort of own little journeys, don't they? And I was the same as you. I really related to Roberta. I would say that I have like 10% of each of the character. Like I could see myself in all of them, because and it's not to say that these characters are two-dimensional or black and white. They're not at all. It's just that I have the paranoia and fear of Chrissy with the like boob taping of Roberta, and the like I'm knowing you're as brave as Samantha, but like I was as dramatic as Teeny, and like, you know what I mean? It's really fun. I was like, oh my god, I'm all of these women, yay.
I love your California accent. Oh my god, I'm like all these women. But that's true. They are all caricatures. So it makes sense that we're going to kind of hopefully relate a little bit to all of them.
Yeah. Sure. And so Samantha, I would argue, is our sort of main character. She's Demi Moore when she grows up. And she's I don't know this actor, Gabby Hoffman. I don't know her at all. I haven't come across her. She's baby Samantha. And her dad leaves the household, so she's sort of going through this parents' divorce. This movie rides the line of heartfelt, emotive moments, and so funny and charming at the same time. So when she's sat at the dinner table and she has all of this inside of her, this worry that, and this isn't ever really sort of explicitly said, this is all just me projecting onto this character from what I'm getting from her, but you feel like she feels guilty that her parents are split up. She feels worried about her dad. She feels scared about the future. She hates her mum, but she loves her mum, and she's confused and she's worried, and then she's got the social pressure where divorce is not a thing in this like neighborhood. And Hank Azaria is at the dinner table being Hank Azaria. And you're like crying for Samantha with her bottled up fury and upset, and you are like dying at Hank Azaria, like chucking wine all over his shirt. And you're like, I was like, this is the perfect movie. Like, this is just like all of the things. I'm feeling all of the things. And it's that, and each of them have those moments where I thought one of them was gonna fucking die at one point. Even though I'd seen them all as adults, I was still like, oh, but maybe she like loses her hearing. Or, yeah. Because I was like, she dead. She ain't getting out of that. Like,
no, yeah. There's this part where Roberta fakes her death, and you see her jump off of this really high tree, and they're like, where'd Roberta go? Where'd Roberta go? And then all of a sudden they spot her across the lake, floating face down. And that part, I even wrote this in my notes. Like, I always just was so convinced she had to be so good at holding her breath, because it's like, that is a very believable suicide, or not suicide, but like death that she just played out. But I think you are describing it has these kind of equal tones of really heavy, along with the soundtrack. I really noticed the soundtrack when I watched it, because obviously so much about a movie is kind of determined by the emotions elicited by the music. And there would be these really heavy parts, like when she convinces her friend she's dead. Chrissy is the only one that's like jumps in to do CPR, and then she figures out she's alive. And Chrissy, the friend that was about to save her and convinced her friend was dead, was super pissed. And you're definitely in this really heavy, serious kind of sub-theme in this movie, which is like mortality. And I think that with these girls coming of age, realizing who they are as women, I think this is totally can be argued, but I feel like death is a sub-theme of all of our coming of age, because I think the more awake we become as humans, usually the more cognizant we are that like we could die, people we know will die, maybe have died. So the subplot with Roberta, who lost her mom, by the way, that, and I don't know if I'm jumping around too much.
No, it's perfect.
But Roberta, the tomboy part of her, character is because she wasn't raised with the mom. Her mom died when she was little. And I have to say, I watched this movie growing up, and I always thought that part was sad. And my mom's dead now. And I think watching it as an older woman, and I remember when my mom died, I was 29, and it was the most heartbreaking thing that's ever happened in my life, the hardest thing. And I remember thinking, gosh, I cannot imagine going through this younger. It made me think about friends I knew that had lost their parents young, like high school, or even and it's a character in a movie, but like this is a thing, losing and what a I don't want to say determining factor, because it doesn't have to be, but it shapes you. So I really kind of see that as like a pretty big plot line in this film as well. As someone that now knows that heartbreak, it's like, oh my gosh, of course she was kind of fucked up and wanted to fake her own death and wouldn't feel her feelings, like she lost her mom.
Like, she doesn't know how to process that. She lost her mom at 4, and she's been battling on without her. And not only that, a big part of this movie is her discovering how her mom actually died. Because, of course, her dad, when she was 4, just said, like, oh, your mom peacefully fell asleep and was carried away by angels. Why would she not believe that? She doesn't know what death is. She's 4. And then when they're looking for something else, she stumbles across the fact that actually her mom died horribly, slowly, painfully in a car crash. And you're right, she sort of learns that, gets angry, bottles it all up, and then it's not until like 25 minutes later in a different scene that she lets it out. And oh my God, Christina Ricci, my heart, like her little performance where she's just like, finally processing what's happened. And all of these characters make sense. I'm really jumping around. I don't even know what I'm saying. I'm just remembering that performance. It's basically just has this monologue about how like death is horrible and it's unfair and lies are horrible and unfair. And this character that's been so strong, both physically and emotionally this whole time, suddenly just breaks. And God, like I'm very lucky, touch wood. I have both my parents still, and I've lost a lot of grandparents, so I do know what it feels like, but I can't, my brain won't even let me consider the possibility a lot of the time, because it's just like, no, we're not going there. It's too much. It's too much.
And I think that I don't think you're alone there, because even as someone that has lost what I considered like my closest, my person, the hardest thing at that point to lose, now I have a child, so I can't say that anymore. I still don't think as humans, my personal theory is we don't have the capacity to really know like that fear, because that's what it is. It's just the awareness of how precious these people are. And so it does really, and part of, I think, the awakening that these girls are going through this summer is, like you just said it, that life is really, can be really fucked up and unfair, because they're also on this quest to figure out, they do this seance at the beginning, and they're looking at a gravestone, and they're like, whose gravestone is this? It's obviously a child. Oh, dear Johnny. That's what the gravestone says. So a lot of the movie is them on this quest to figure out what happened to dear Johnny. And they figure it out in the scene that you're talking about with Christina Ricci. And she's, really processing the tragedy and sadness and heartbreak of finding out how horrifically her mother died. They also find out that dear Johnny and his mother were murdered very senselessly by what was probably someone trying to rob them. And so whether you've lost someone in life or not, I think I know we all see that kind of stuff happen. And the older we are and the more able to take perspective and think, A, that could be me, and B, why was it them, and C, why is life like this?
Yeah.
I think that we can all really relate to that sadness. And really, this is so tantamount to what I do as a coach, because I feel like what I try to do is be with people in like, life is fucked up and unfair, and I don't know why either, and sad and hard, and like I could go down the list of like terrible, and also it's really beautiful, and we have these, you know, in the movie, incredible friendships and ability to support each other, and possibility to like giggle about like food and Hank's teeth, and, you know, punch boys because they're saying girls can't play softball, and like I'm kind of like picking some kind of lighter moments, but it's like I feel like it sort of displays, to give now and then a lot of credit, which I love it. It's such a paradox of heaviness and sadness and tragedy of life.
Yeah.
And just like lighthearted, fun music, bike riding, idyllic, beautiful parts of life, just like mishmash.
It's so perfect. I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. You've put the nail on the head. A really moment that highlights that is they're cycling down the road, and they've got their radio playing like some funky 60s jam, and they come across Brendan Fraser, who's like been sent home from like Vietnam. Yeah. And like he sits with them and smokes for a bit, and they're just like, la 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 la, how's Vietnam? Was it good? Are we winning? And he's just like, yeah, the government's lying to you, and we're all dying out there. And they're
Nobody's
like,
winning.
Oh, okay. We gotta go home now, bye. It's like, whoa. And like, what's interesting is that the whole movie is sort of narrated by Demi Moore looking back on that summer, and I can't remember what she says at that moment, but I imagine it, like, even if she doesn't say it, you know that she'd be looking back like, in retrospect, I realize now what that meeting meant and what he was and represented, and how sad and tragic and huge that was. But for us at the time, we were just sharing a cigarette with a handsome stranger, and he is handsome. Oh, young Brendan Fraser, how I love you.
Oh my gosh, I know. We should talk about Encino Man next.
Oh, yes.
Have you ever seen that?
No.
Okay,
but I just love him.
He's the main character in that. Yeah, he's a cutie.
I love him. It's the Mummy. He's like the 1999 Mummy.
Oh yeah,
He's
totally.
like
prime
peak Brendan. But yeah, he plays this soldier that's just like injured and sad, and just, but still like having a great time, because he's like, hey, it's a bunch of 11-year-olds, let's have a cigarette together. But like, it brings in the outside. It's interesting because it brings the outside world into this sleepy little town for a bit, and you're suddenly aware that there's a much wider thing outside of this gravestone that's been split in half by lightning, that they think they've resurrected someone from the dead, which is so
gosh.
scary. Like, so much of this movie I was like, I am afraid. I'm like, they're using like horror tropes, and I'm frightened. I really am.
I'm sorry, Emily. Are you okay? Okay, I want to ask you, when you were a kid, I know you didn't see this movie when you were a kid, but when you were a young girl, did you do seances? Did you try and summon Bloody Mary? Did you do this kind of stuff?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Still will not even entertain the idea of doing like a Ouija board, or even saying Bloody Mary 3 times in front of the mirror. Like, no way, not tempting it. Doesn't mean I necessarily believe in it, but I believe in it enough that I'm not going to try it. Absolutely not. No way. No.
Okay, so does that mean you don't do scary movies on this podcast?
I do, though. I love horror movies. Isn't that weird?
That is interesting.
I love horror movies. I didn't when I was a kid. And this is the thing. If I had watched Now and Then when I was 11 and they were doing a seance in the graveyard, I honestly would have probably turned it off and then had to come back to it like 5 years later. Because none of that. And then when I hit like 16, what I used to do, I always used to Wikipedia the plot lines of horrors. I wouldn't watch them. I couldn't have the visual image, but I wanted desperately to know what happened in them. So I'd read a lot about them, and I'd read a lot of behind the scenes of them and stuff, but I would never actually watch them. And then like I hit 15, 16 and I started watching them, and now I like can't get enough of them, and I'm like, give me all of the horror movies right now. It's really weird.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. And I guess, I mean, I can take perspective and imagine that part being scary. I was like so into ghost stories. I kind of still am. I don't have the life I used to have, but I used to be like really into going to haunted places, trying to, and I'm totally a skeptic, by the way. You're not talking to someone that's like, I'm sure that there's ghosts. But I was so into this part of the plot because it is, you know, they go to the graveyard twice in the movie. The first time to have the first seance, they think they summon the ghost of Dear Johnny. The second time, and I'm going to jump around a little bit. So they're convinced throughout the movie that they potentially brought Dear Johnny back from the dead and that they're maybe being haunted. You kind of get that sense in a few of the scenes. Yeah. And then we have the real life stuff happening that we've been talking about, like the heaviness, the dealing with the mother's death and divorce and all of that. And then at the end, they go to try and put Dear Johnny to rest, right? Like they figured out what happened, that he was murdered. And this part kind of breaks my heart as an adult, because what happens in the cemetery is that as they're trying to like chant and, you know, help his spirit to rest, they realize that it wasn't them that cracked his gravestone, which was the entire reason they thought he was back from the dead. It was someone who worked in the cemetery. He had bumped into it. I forgot what else happens in that part, but ultimately they just realized that they had sort of made this up, that he wasn't back from the dead. This wasn't a haunting. This was a very explainable, circumstantial, very real graveyard situation. And I actually wrote the line down at the very end because, like I said, it kind of breaks my heart, but I think it's so powerful. And I think it's something like, when you get older, it's not that you don't want to believe, but too much has happened that you can't.
I literally wrote the same line down. I want that tattooed on my forehead. That broke my heart when they said that.
Here it is. I knew at that moment our days of playing make-believe were over. As we grow older, it becomes difficult to just believe. It's not that we don't want to, but too much has happened that we can't. I secretly don't want you to get that tattooed because I feel like it's so sad, but it feels very true. I think that it's like, even someone like myself, who I am admittedly a magical thinker, I love to believe in possibility, and with, you know, friends on the other side, I like to think about connections with spirits and all of this very fantastical in some ways, not, you know, lack of evidence in others. And the more into evidence and being able to explain things and sort of on the ground we get as we grow older, the harder it is to believe, to have seances, even though you never did.
Yeah.
But I think part of what we can all relate to, if we've had a really close friend where you know everything about each other, you have cried in front of each other, which especially as adults, like that's a pretty intimate friendship.
Oh yeah.
And then maybe you're not close anymore. It's almost like a breakup when you see someone. I saw an ex of mine at the park. It was like a couple months back, but we just walked by each other and I just like at the last second realized who it was and then kept walking. It was not a great relationship, but it's like that person has known so much of you, whether it's a friendship or a romantic relationship. And now it's kind of awkward. And now, you know, with mine, it's like, we didn't even say anything, which to me is kind of sad, but with friends, it can be so interesting to like come back together and share this really incredible time and also not share anything at all publicly.
Yeah.
I said publicly, but I meant presently. That didn't make any sense. And also too, while we're on this subject, we live in such an interesting time where we have the possibility or the ability to keep everyone. As in, social media is so fucking weird in that sense that I had like this, I told you I was a drug addict, so I'll just say I got sober in 2012. And at that point in my life, there was this hard and fast restart where all my friends kind of restarted too. So my social media has only been since then. And even in the last, so that's 8 years. There's so many people on there that I've kind of just collected. And I say that in like a loving way, but we don't necessarily have anything in common anymore. But I might still see what they ate for breakfast. I might still actually be really interested too. There's some people digitally that I've become really close with that in real life, we were never that close. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I guess I was bringing this up because it's like, we saw this movie, it was based in, 1995, where they didn't have this ability to be like, oh yeah, I saw that guy you were dating last year. Or, Demi Moore's character isn't like blogging about her most recent work. I guess it's just friendships, I think, have definitely changed in the last 20 years in terms of how we can stay connected. So, I mean, I just think it's such a gift. I've already said, I think it's so cool what you're doing here, because for one, we get to resuscitate. That was the word I was looking for earlier. I feel like you get to resuscitate these movies and possibly maybe get them into like multiple ears, eyes that wouldn't have seen them. Mm-hmm. And also for someone like me that gets to dive into this movie I've seen a million times, like, and kind of watch it for the first time, really paying attention to how do I feel and how do I relate to this, and what would I want to tell someone else about it. And I guess maybe now that we've had our entire conversation about inclusion and diversity and the water that we swim in and all of that, it would be to pay attention. For me, I just so related to this film. I felt like as a kid, I saw possibility, and that is pretty massive gift for anyone, to feel like something is possible based on art, whether it's a book or a film or just someone that you see doing something out there in the world. Mm-hmm. So I felt that. And A, I think whoever's listening should check out this movie, but B, I would say pay attention to what really gives you that feeling yourself, even if it's not widely perceived as an artistic or beneficial or critically acclaimed or even box office successful film. If you relate to it, that is your fucking jam, go with it. Because I think, I feel like a sub-theme of our conversation is life is hard and complex and weird, and also fucking beautiful and hilarious, and can be really lighthearted, and a movie that, you can find, whoever you are, eat that up. Because the way I look at it, like I said, I'm a life coach. That's part of, and it's funny because I'm a very, in some ways, dark person. And when you think of a life coach, I think of like an SNL character that's like, rah, 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 like, go you. And that is completely what I do, but in a very real sense. Like, I think that all of us have within us possibility. Some of us are lucky enough to be able to see that displayed in front of us in the world we live in. Some of us didn't have great caregivers. Some of us didn't have, a media that represented what it should have and showed us what we could be and what we could do. And some of us too, I'm going to speak for myself, had the privilege of feeling like there were so many opportunities and so many possibilities that I just collapsed under the weight of it all and didn't do anything, because if I wasn't going to be something big and important and special, then what's the point? Mm-hmm. And I had to go on a real journey to come to find out that we are all ourselves so important and special just because we're us, as cheesy as that sounds. Yeah. And we can like inflict this meaning on what it is that we do or who it is we decide to be. And so I feel like I'm trying to kind of tie that into the art, because we are all what we consume. I remember someone said that to me, you are the media you consume. And I was like, ooh, that really makes me think, like, what am I listening to? What am I watching? What am I believing? So ultimately, I guess, to get back to what I do, like, I help people to identify who they want to be and see the possibility that they might not see. Because once you see it, it is evidence-based, like, you can be it. That's not woo-woo or like rah-rah life. It's like a lot of us genuinely don't have any idea our capability. And once we're given this really strong mirror and someone that's like, oh, I expect you to go after this thing that is completely possible for you. It's incredible the stuff that we can do. So yeah, that's kind of my soapbox. And I'm just so grateful to be able to kind of postulate on these really, for me, like, not paid attention to parts of my worldview, but they're so formative. So thank you so much for inviting me on and watching this movie.
Oh my goodness, thank you. Not only did I get to watch an absolutely gorgeous movie, but you've just like sat here and blown my mind for like an hour. You're so articulate and you're so strong and you're so wise and like you're just so fun. Like, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been such a joy. Honestly.
I'm gonna bottle that thing you just said and like put it in my brain, and then whenever I'm having a tough day, I'm gonna be like, but Emily said this really nice thing. Thank you so much. I so appreciate it. And I'm such a huge fan. This is such a cool thing that you're doing. And I'm just glad that you're doing it.
Thank you. I love it. It's literally, when I press record, I'm just like at peace.
And you're kind of made for it. Like you have a real way, like, and I've listened to your other episodes as well, but I just think you're great at pulling out the substance in both films and in people, because that takes some skill. So keep doing this. Stick with this.
Aw, thank you.
Truly. I think it's really special. And it's funny how something as surface seeming, like, oh, we're going to talk about a movie, is like, no, we're going to talk about life and how all of this stuff affects us and how we synthesize it and then go out and live in the world. And yeah, it's interesting, Emily, not too long ago, someone said that her podcast was about suicide and preventing it. And I was like, oh, wow, that's a really heavy subject and so important. And then I looked at it and it was not about suicide. Like nowhere in the topic did it say suicide. It was all about basically ways to live life that would make us feel better, which is like a very generic way. Luckily I'm not pitching her podcast, but I was like, so in that way, this is a reach, but all of us that are doing things that mean a lot to us and we're trying to kind of put out there to the world to hopefully make people feel less alone or be entertained or feel better. All of that relates to mental health, I guess, to make it very important, right?
Definitely. Like shared experiences and understanding, and I really tap into nostalgia, which is huge at the moment, and like hopefully that makes people think of better times or reminds them of friendships or relationships that they can seek out and share these memories with. And like all of these things have little stepping stones to better places, I like to think. And maybe you just really enjoy fucking movies.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. This was super fun.
Thank you. Where can we find your podcast?
Oh, okay. So my podcast is on iTunes, it's on SoundCloud, Spotify, and it's called Follow Your Fire, Life, Work, and Purpose. You might need to put all those in the search. I hope it'll just turn up with Follow Your Fire, but yeah, and it's really just a series of interviews of interesting people who I try to find the most interesting parts about. Like, I think it doesn't matter what your journey is. I think it's interesting if we can identify the things that we all share, like the shared human experience. And I just love to hear about insecurities and how people get past them. Partly because I'm self-centered and that's my jam. Like I was such an insecure, and I am. You can be completely riddled with like the doubts and the voices telling you, don't do this, you're not good enough, blah, blah, blah. And you can totally do stuff anyway and figure out how to not listen to those. So I love to find people who are like, oh yeah, I'm terrified this week because I have this scary meeting and here's how I'm going to deal with it. And hopefully pump all of us up with that idea. Like, oh, you can do hard things too.
It's so, as I said, it's like, it's so inspirational. Like, I was listening to it in the bath and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to go and conquer the fucking world. Like, why not?
Oh my gosh, please do. We need you to, Emily. Go conquer the world.
I'll put that on my to-do list.
Put it on your, what is today, Saturday to-do list. Buy some bananas, return that item to Target, conquer the world.
Boom, boom, boom. No worries. Thank you so much. This has been so wonderful.
Thank you too.
And thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time on Why This Film. Bye!